Well, hello, Chris. How are we doing today?
Doing great, John. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm doing great. You look awfully dressed up today for Behind the Sermon. I appreciate your formality and your willingness to come in dressed up.
Well, thanks. I just this is what I had on today, so I'm rolling with it.
All right.
I'm rolling with it. Took the tie off, so hopefully it won't be as formal as it could have been.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to welcome you to Behind the Sermon with us today. We are going to go behind the sermon that Chris preached yesterday. We used to be called Sermon Recap, but we have been asking for a catchy name, trying to find something better, and somebody suggested Behind the Sermon to me. And, you know, we had a few other suggestions. Behind the Sermon was the one I liked the most. So I appreciate everyone who suggested stuff and gave us those. Behind the Sermon was the one we felt like was kind of the best one. You like the ring of it, Chris?
I do. I like Behind the Sermon.
Yeah, I like it too. I am your host, John Rhoades, our preacher from this Sunday, and our preacher today is Chris Gregg. Remember that if you would like to input any questions or anything like that, you can always tweet us. You can send us a message on Facebook or Instagram, or comment on the post that we always put out on Facebook, letting people know about Behind the Sermon. Now, Chris, yesterday you talked about the show Tidying Up.
Yes.
And I had a thought in my mind, because you mentioned that you could tidy up your house.
Absolutely.
A little bit. What is the room? Because I think we all have this room in our house. What is the room in your house that you just really need to get in there and tidy it up?
I tell you, because we're going to be moving in the next 6 months, the first room we're probably going to tidy up is the basement. I've got shelves, and I've got tools, and I've got stuff that we haven't touched since we moved into this house. We've been there 20 years, and so, but I probably won't be holding it, cradling it in my arms and saying, does it bring me joy? Does this make me happy?
You say that, but when it comes time to clean something out, it's always harder to throw stuff away.
It is, and I'm especially attached to some tools that I might possibly use.
Yeah.
I get into trouble that way. And I might find some things I didn't even know I had because it hasn't been in there.
Don't we all? That's
Forever.
The best part. When you clean something out, you find something. You hadn't used it in the past 6 months because you didn't know it was there.
There you go.
But maybe you could use it. Well, that's a good segue into what we're going to be talking about today, where you talked about relinquishing resentment yesterday. And, you know, we need to tidy up our resentment. And I think that you did an awesome job talking about it yesterday. One thing you said that I really enjoyed, and I'd like for you to expand on a little bit, with how you talked about it in the Bible, you said the cross mandates that we should forgive.
Absolutely.
And, you know, Jesus Christ has forgiven us on the cross. And I'm wondering, you know, you talked a lot about us forgiving. What about the author of 1 Corinthians? You know, Paul. He was somebody that he needed all kinds of forgiveness for himself.
Absolutely.
You know, so what was he forgiven for, and who did he at some point forgive himself?
Absolutely. In 1 Thessalonians, I think it's chapter 1, it wasn't in the sermon this last week, but he calls himself the chief sinner of all. And remember in Acts 7 yesterday, we looked at Stephen, that they laid their cloaks, the Jews that stoned Stephen, one of the first martyrs of the early church, at Saul, who would be Paul's feet. So he was consenting and supporting emotionally and physically the killing of Stephen and many others. And so Paul calls himself a murderer. Paul calls himself the chief among sinners. And here was this good guy, Pharisee, religiously right in every way, that realized all of a sudden, hey, I'm guilty. I persecuted Christ and Christians.
Right.
So that's what the grace that we've received is the grace we ought to give, because we have been forgiven much. We should forgive others. That doesn't mean that what we're saying, what happened was okay. Right. That you shouldn't prosecute them if you were abused. It's not something that you should ever allow again. Right. We're not saying, we're not trying to diminish it, but don't hold that poison inside of you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're going through something where you are consistently being hurt, or somebody's consistently hurting you, forgiveness doesn't mean just leave it alone and let them continue on what they're doing. You have to protect yourself. You have to take care of yourself. But like you talked about, the resentment of it. After you have taken care of that, after you have worked through getting yourself free from that, you know, do you hold on to that?
Right.
No. The cross mandates that we forgive, we let that go. We forgive because it helps them, but at the end of the day, forgiveness helps us too.
Absolutely.
It gives us
gives
a release.
Right. Gives us opportunity for joy and peace. And we don't want those around us to suffer because of us and our resentment.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, it's a big thing to talk about getting over it. Because sometimes in our society, the term, well, get over it. That doesn't always have the best connotation. Right. It's like, well, you're upset, just get over it. Right. But I don't think you meant it in the same way. When you were talking about it yesterday, you didn't mean it in the same way. So would you expand on that a little bit? What did you mean exactly when you were telling people, get over it? And how is love involved with getting over it?
Absolutely. I think in our culture today, and many of us are easily offended, we take the most negative aspect of a situation, and it may not even be a big deal. It may not have even been on our radar or even intended. We may not see someone and not say hi to them. We may not know a person's circumstance, and they may be carrying something that they feel guilty about. We may not even know about, but because we don't engage them because we don't know about it, then they are offended, and we don't even know what we've offended them for. Right. And so a lot of things we shouldn't have to forgive because it was never an offense to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's what we've kind of got to look at, is that we don't want to be thin-skinned. We want to be thicker-skinned as Christians, and also give people the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
To fill that gap with a positive. They didn't realize what they were doing.
Right.
Now it's different if they did, then you might have to confront them and say, hey, that hurt my feelings.
Right. I mean, if they had malice, if they had any poor intentions or anything like that, that makes it different.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I know in my life, I have had multiple circumstances where in the moment, you talk about, we look back on it and we say, well, it wasn't really that big of a deal. In the moment, it was the biggest deal to me in the world. This person did this to me, it hurt. It shouldn't have been done. Right. I look at it a month, 2 months, maybe 6 months later, and I'm like, was it really that big of a deal?
Right.
And I look back on it and I say, you know what, I just need to get over it.
And odds are it could have just simply been a miscommunication or misunderstanding, that a few words and a check of, hey, what happened?
Right. And that's why communication is so important. If you are upset with somebody and they have no idea you're upset with them, it's important to communicate that to them in a kind, loving way, to go to them and say, if, for example, I went up to Chris and I said, Chris, I don't appreciate that you spit in my coffee every morning. You could say, I had no idea that would offend you, but now that you've told me, I will no longer spit in your coffee.
I'll try not to do that anymore.
Now, obviously, that's a silly example, but you get the point.
Absolutely.
And if somebody is to come to you and say, hey, what you've done has really offended me, it's hurt me, we got to treat that with love and grace too. Maybe we don't understand it. I think you said it yesterday when you were on stage. You were saying, some of you are offended right now. Some of you have offended you and I don't even know it. If somebody were to come up to us and say, hey, look, you've hurt me, you've offended me, the best thing we can do is, even if you think you're right, apologize, show them love, show them kindness, because not everybody gets hurt by the same things. And chances are, someday they might look back and they say, you know what, that was kind of silly for me to get offended over. It's possible. It's possible. Now, let's go on to the last one, which is, if you don't get rid of it, you said this, if you don't get rid of it, it can become an infection.
Right.
Now, I have had infected toes before. It's not fun.
They're nasty.
Yeah, you don't want an infected toe. Had to have my toenail ripped off. I was not asleep for it. It was gross. It was nasty. Yeah. Don't get an infection. You don't want to get a physical infection, but you also don't want to get a sin infection as well. Oftentimes, our anger towards someone can result in, kind of like misfired anger towards the people we love. Because we're angry at somebody else, we might treat the people we love with resentment or disrespect, and we don't want to do that. What would be your steps if somebody here is watching with us today and they say, you know what, I am going through something where I am just repressing my resentment, I am repressing my anger. What would be your steps to getting over that, to getting rid of it, to forgiving that, however you want to say
First of all, you've got to identify what it is, and then we got to determine to get rid of it, and then the next thing is that you say, God, I relinquish this.
Right.
I don't want to carry this baggage. I don't want this infection anymore. I don't want it to poison the intimacy in my marriage or in my family or in my other relationships. I want to release this to you, to give it up to you. And when it comes back up, when the video replays in your head again, or that hurt feeling comes, you do it again.
Right.
I release this. Now, if you don't know what it is, then you need to probably ask the Lord to show you.
Right.
Hey, where am I holding bitterness, resentment, and rage?
Right.
And you might even ask your family members, hey, I've got a problem here, and I really can't identify it. Can you guess where it is? And then really lean in and listen and to what the Holy Spirit says and what your family says to you, so that you can identify what that is and then release it. And me, over and over again, I've had those situations in my life where I'd have to say, Lord, I've forgiven this, and Satan's reminding me of this, and I've got to release it again. And I'm going to intentionally not hold this or allow this to carry on in my life, so it doesn't poison me.
Right. And it doesn't hurt the people around you.
Right. And it doesn't hurt the people or future generations.
Right. Yeah, I am somebody who has been guilty of being upset or something like that, and I've not even known it, and I have been upset with other people because of it. And I have been the one who's had to swallow my pride, have some humility, and say, okay, I got something right now that I'm stressed out about or I'm upset about, and I got to figure out what it is, because it's not fair to the people around me. And that takes humility to do, to swallow your pride, to ask and say, what is it that you think that I am so upset about, that I have not been the same person, that I've not been the same me. So, all right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on Behind the Sermon. I think it was a great sermon yesterday. I really appreciated what you talked about, and I hope everybody else did too. I can't wait to hear the rest of the series. You have any final thoughts or anything like that for us?
No, last week somebody messaged me and said, hey, I apologize. I resented you because. And I responded back, hey, I didn't even know that I offended you. And I'm sorry, and I'm praying for you. And I just ask God to bless you. Thank you for doing that.
Right. And when you have kindness and you have love on both ends, when you have forgiveness on both ends, it makes for an easy conversation like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. Thank you for joining us here for Behind the Sermon. We look forward to next week, and we will be right back here again next week. Thanks so much for joining us.